Sanhedrin Daf Yomi Sanhedrin, the love languages, ומכבדה יותר מגופו. And the idea here is that different people experience honor and disrespect in different ways. We talked yesterday about boshet and we talked about begam, but it's not just that there are different types of respect and shame and embarrassment and humiliation. There are all sorts of different types. But even in each section, people experience it differently. Very often, if I'm working with a group of people and they'll talk about the importance of respect, in our team, respect is an important value. In our company, respect is an important value. And then I probe a little bit and I say, so what is it that makes you feel disrespected? And everybody around the table has a different thing, which people don't realize that I might not feel disrespected if you do or don't do something to me. It might not bother me, as we discussed yesterday, but somebody else might feel very disrespected. So we have to be sufficiently aware of how other people interpret and how other people experience respect and disrespect. And that's what self-awareness is. Self-awareness doesn't mean being aware of yourself. That's kind of obvious, although not many people are even aware of themselves. But when we talk about self-awareness, we're talking about being aware of how other people experience things that you say and things that you do, and to understand that irrespective of your intention, you can do or say something which causes an effect which is not intended at all. And not only that, but you can say something to one person which causes no ill effect, and exactly the same thing to another person makes them feel terribly insulted and disrespected. And so one has to be very, very tuned in. This is a particularly relevant between husbands and wives in relationships, because men and women experience respect and disrespect in completely different ways. Let's understand, this brisa that we're talking about on Daf Yomi is not really core to the sugya, but I'm dealing with because it's so important. It's really from Yevomis on Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis in Yevomis. We didn't have a Matmonim on Daf Samach Beis Amud Beis because I probably would have dealt with it then if we did have a shir that day. So we'll deal with it now. The brisa that the Gemara brings is the statement of Ha'ohev et ishto kegufo. If one loves one's wife as much as one loves oneself, ומכבדה יותר מגופו, and one honors her more than one honors oneself, ומדריך בניו ובנותיו בדרך ישרה, and you guide your sons and daughters in a straight way, והמסיע, it's interesting, it does not even בדרך טובה, not in a good way, not in a righteous way, not in a religious way, just yashar, just that they should be straight people. Just to start just with that, what is a derech hayashar? Just to be straight. V'hamasi'an samuch lefirkan, and you marry them off at the right time, at the appropriate time. Alav ha'katuv omer, about that the posuk says, the Torah tells us, v'yodata ki shalom o'alecha ufakadeta navacha. And you'll know, if that's the way you treat your family, you treat your wife and you treat your children when you're away from home, you're traveling, you know everything's okay at home. You know the family's good, nothing's missing, nothing's untoward at home. So there's a special bracha if we respond in that way. We'll see further on, the Rambam paskins this lahalacha, that it's not just a matter of getting a special bracha, that it's much more than that. What is this יותר מגופו? Why do I have to honor my wife more than myself? I have to love her as myself. One has to love everybody as oneself. And we've discussed before different views. The Ramban who talks about how is that even possible? How can you love somebody else as yourself? How can the Torah instruct you to love yourself as yourself? But at least in the case of your wife, the level of love her as much as you love yourself. And the Rishonim say one of the areas that applies, that don't put her to trouble in ways that you wouldn't trouble yourself. Don't load her in ways that you wouldn't allow yourself to be loaded. Different ways of what that means, expressing that kind of love. But what is מכבדה יותר מגופו? To honor her even more than yourself. Why is that so? So Rashi on Yevomis, Rashi doesn't say it here. Rashi, in this exactly the same brisa that's brought in Yevomis on Daf Samach Beis, says, Deziluta deitata kashem midegavra. Because a woman feels cheapened more easily than a man does. So that's really important. What Rashi is then saying is the reason you have to show her more honor than you demand for yourself is because if you only showed her as much honor as you demand for yourself, she would feel disrespected. So you would say, But I don't expect anything more for that than for myself. Yeah, but you're a guy, she's a girl, different. And she feels disrespected more easily than a man does. And where does that come from? These are not just things that Rashi makes up. Everything is from Chazal. So we've got a Gemara in Yevomus Daf Kuf, where the Gemara says that when you're handing out Maaseh, you're handing out Maaseh for the poor people, and notnim li'isha tchila. You give the woman first. People are standing in line to receive their Maaseh Sheni, the poor people. You give the women first. In most cases, men go first because of the chiyuv mitzvahs. There are all sorts of reasons why mostly men go first. It's not as it is in secular society, but not when it comes to tzedakah. You give the woman first. My timer mishum ziluta. And Rava says, originally says, Rava, I always, when a matter used to come to me to court, and there's people are in the waiting room, there are people asking shaylas, there are people who are bringing court cases to Beis Din. I used to attend to the men first because they've got to get back and learn. They've got mitzvahs to do, they've got Torah to learn. I would take care of the men first. But when I learned this din, that you give the woman first because of ziluta, now, kivan deshmanala, once I heard this din, sharina tigra di itata bereisha, I first deal with matters of the women, and I clear that through the Beis Din before I get busy with the matters for the men. My time mishum ziluta. Once again, the reason is because of the ease with which she feels cheapened. And so we see from this Gemara that if they're men and they're women, men also feel cheapened. They've got to sit in the waiting room for hours and hours. You all know what it's like when you go to a government office and you've got to sit there and you've got to wait and you wait and wait. It doesn't feel good. It feels cheap that somebody's not respecting your time. Yes, it feels cheap for men as well, but it feels worse for women. So from there, Rashi learns that ziluta de itata kashem de gavra, that the disrespect, that a woman feels disrespected more easily than a man feels disrespected, and therefore one has to, in order just to equal the playing fields, just to give her the same sense of respect as you have, you need to show her more respect than you would demand for yourself, because that's the nature of the woman. And we've spoken before that not all women are like that, not all men are like that. We're talking about the masculine persona and the feminine persona and how they need to be addressed. But our Rashi says something quite amazing altogether. Rashi says, so how are you mechabeda? It's not just Rashi, many of the Rishonim say this. How do you show her this honor? What are you supposed to do? Stand up when she walks into the room? Are you supposed to call her Your Highness? What are you supposed to do? What do you show her? What respect do you show her? It says Rashi, B'tachshitin na'im. Buy her jewelry. Buy her jewelry. Really? That's what COVID is? So buying her jewelry is not just a gift. It's the essence of being mekayim, מכבדה יותר מגופו. Nowadays, men wear jewelry as well. So you've got to be sure that what you invest in your wife is a lot more than you would invest in your own jewelry. That it's tachshitim noim, beautiful jewelry and clothing. Why? Because the Gemara says in Ksubas, these are all chazals. It's just beautiful how this is consistent through Shas. Dvarim sha'isha mishtokeket alehem, based on the Posuk in Hosea, the Gemara says in Ksubas, there are things that a woman craves. Umayni, what are they? Tachshitim. She craves jewelry. Harry Oppenheimer, who used to be this multi-millionaire in South Africa, owned De Beers and Anglo-American. De Beers controlled the diamond market at that time, and Anglo-American controlled the gold market. And once there was a bit of a recession going on, and somebody was sitting next to Harry Oppenheimer, and they said to him, how's business? Things are rough at the moment. He said, my business is always good. It depends on the greed of men and the vanity of women. And yes, the men want gold out of greed. They store it. They don't have to wear it. They want to have it. And women want tachshitim. They want diamonds. The fact that diamonds have retained their value, what does that mean? A woman wants tachshitim. Why? What is it? What's so important about the tachshitim? Again, we need to understand the woman, the feminine woman, from a Torah perspective. What does it really mean? How to look at it through a Torah lens? And from a Torah lens, kvod bat melech prima, a woman's honor is at home. That's where she feels honored. A man goes out. Where does he feel honored? He goes out and and he meets his business people, and he does a deal, and the deal is successful, he feels good. He feels his ego. He goes and he works in his profession, and he's recognized for his excellence. He feels good. He gives a good shir, and everybody says yeshikeach, and he feels good. But where does a woman get that input from? A woman's kvod bat melech pnima. She's working at home. The children hardly ever say thank you, never mind honor her. And all she's got as her source of affirmation is her husband. If a woman starts needing affirmation from outside the home, that's a problem. That's why the Gemara tells us over here that if one treats one's wife and children in this particular way, then v'yadata ki shalom alecha. When you're away and when she's away, you know everything's okay. She's not going around looking for affirmation. A lot of the difficulties we have in the intersexual relationships in public, in the marketplace, in the world at wide is because women need a level of affirmation that they're not getting at home. And we'll see in the Rambam in a moment that's why it's so important that a woman looks up to her husband. Because if she doesn't look up to her husband, then the affirmation she gets from him is not valuable. If in her mind, her husband is the most admirable person in the world, and he admires her, then she feels satisfied. That's all I need. This amazing man who is my husband. And it can't be something which is fake and inauthentic. It's the role, the onus is on a man to make sure that he is so admirable that his honor of his wife is felt by her to be worth more than anybody else's honor. He needs to see that he's such a person. And in choosing a marriage partner, one has to see, the woman has to see that she's marrying somebody that she regards as the most amazing human being she knows. And he's got to see that he's marrying somebody whose need for affirmation he can satisfy. If he's a shlemiel, he shouldn't marry a princess. It's not a good idea because he'll never satisfy that. No matter how much attention he'll pour on her, if in her eyes he's not amazing, it doesn't matter if everybody else thinks he's a shlemiel. What's important is what does she think? What does she think about him? If she thinks he's the most wonderful person in the world, then his attention is worth everything to her. So that's her only source of affirmation. And when she goes out into the world among her friends, again, and assuming in a society which was somewhat segregated, she goes out among her friends, how do they know that she's a loved and admired woman? They don't see them together. How do they know? A man goes out and everybody sees he's driving his Cadillac or his Porsche or his Ferrari. They see him in his beautiful suit. They see people giving him a lot of attention. They realize this is an Adam Choshuv. This is somebody important. How does the woman get that feeling of, do people know that I'm important or anything? Am I just like anybody else? It's by her clothing and her takshitim and her jewelry. The people look at it and say, this is somebody whose husband adores her. And that's really important to her. That is part of that affirmation. We all need affirmation. We all need validation. We talked yesterday about how our value in the market is in the hands of one another. We can give a person a sense of dignity and value, or deprive a person of that value. We can devalue people, and we can value people, and we can make people feel valued in public. The way we enable our wives to feel valued, not just when they're with us, but even when they're out in public, is that they should be able to see through the way they're able to dress and present themselves and live. They're able to project an image of this as somebody who's enormously valuable. To who? To one person. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be any more than one. Who's she enormously valuable to? Her husband. So by the way a man relates to his wife in public and in private, and the way he invests in her, that gives her that sense of being valued. That's the value of takshitim. That's why takshitim are so important. And if one doesn't invest in her more than in oneself, she's not even on an even level. You can say, okay, I'm being mechabed her. So according to Rashi, it would seem that this idea of מכבדה יותר מגופו is part of the way you love her. האוהב את אשתו כגופו requires that מכבדה יותר מגופו. Because זילותא דאיתתא קשה מדגברא. So if you're not honoring her more than you honor yourself, then you're not loving her as yourself, because she feels less than yourself. So according to Rashi, it's one idea. You have to have them hand in hand. The one without the other is insufficient. But in the Yad Ramah, we see it a little differently. The Yad Ramah says, Ohev kegufo, that there's no requirement that you should love her more than you love yourself. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Why? Because lo shayach l'meima. It's not possible to say yeter migufo. Sharei ahava davar hamasul l'lev hi, ve'ein adam yachol le'ehov et acher yeter migufo. You can't love another person more than you love yourself. And that's why self-love, loving yourself, is the most important midah. Valuing yourself, that doesn't mean arrogance, that doesn't mean self-focused, it doesn't mean being self-centered. It just means valuing yourself. Because you can't value others, says the Ramah, more than you value yourself. You don't have the capacity to know what it is to value somebody else more than you value yourself. A person who feels nothing about themselves can't feel an enormous amount. You can be afraid of other people, you can be intimidated by other people, you can fear other people. But to love somebody, if you don't love yourself, if you don't know that you're a valuable human being, if you don't feel loved by the Ribbono Shel Olam, there's no way you don't have the capacity to express that love to another person. However, says the Ramah, but when it comes to honor, that there you can, yachol lechabda yeter migufo, because honoring her, that you can do more than yourself, because honoring her is a matter of action. Love is a matter of feeling, and you can't expect a person to feel about somebody else more than they feel about themselves. But to honor her, that's something that you can give, that you can do through an action. What is the action? B'malbushim shenaim yoter mishelo. Make sure she's got nicer clothes than you. Make sure she spends more on her clothes than you do. Make sure she's got takshitim, that she's got jewelry in ways that you don't have. Invest in her. You can invest in her. That's a way that you can be mekayim. So according to the Yad Ramah, it would seem not that this is the same thing. They're two different things. There's oev kegufo is an emotional responsibility. And mechabda yoter migufo is a financial investment that you make in a wife to give her that sense of value and that sense of importance. Where these halachas are brought in the Rambam, we have quoted this Rambam once before at the end of the 15th parak of Hilchos Ishus. The Rambam says, "V'chein tzivu chachamim." There's a tzivui, there's an instruction. Sheyehei adam mechabed et ishto yoter migufo. That you've got to honor your wife more than yourself. Or avakagufo, even though you only have to love her like yourself, you've got to honor her more than yourself. V'im yesh lo mamon marbe betovata kefi hamamon. If you have money, spend it on her. If you have the capacity, invest in her. Spend the money on her. That's a veloya tilen, and he goes on. So that's how you're mechabed the wife. He goes the same as Rashi goes, that the way you are mechabed a wife is by making sure that you're investing in her. That gives her that sense of being. When it comes to the man, the Rambam says in the next halacha, and a woman has to be mechabed her husband also. How does he do it? Does she buy him his golden Rolex? Is that the way she's mechabed him? No. The way she honors him is a different way altogether. He's driven by ego. She's driven by heart. She wants to feel loved and adored, and investing in her gives her that sense. And by the way, you can't just say it's money. Is that important? That's the essence of Kiddushin. That in Kiddushin, there are three dimensions with which to love and acquire a woman. There's kesef, there's gifts. That's one of the ways, the way we mekadesh a woman is with a gift. And there's shtar, writing, expressing one's words, committing oneself. And bio in a physical relationship. But for the man, he needs respect. He's got ego. Woman is driven by heart, a man is driven by ego. And if she wants her man to feel adored by her, the way to do that is not to give him jewelry, not to give him clothing. He can buy that himself. The way to do that is to be there, is to serve him, in the sense of to provide service for him. And there's a very important book some of you might have come across by Gary Chapman, The 5 Love Languages. And he talks about the fact that different people experience love in different ways. And I put them in the footnote. There's the words of affirmation. For some people, it's what you say. I love you, I adore you, I care about you. For some people, it's attention, quality time. So spend time with me if you adore me. Don't tell me you love me and don't give me any time. For some, it's physical touch. For some, it's acts of service. And for some, it's receiving gifts. That there are different ways that we experience love, and between men and women, those differences are biggest of all. Says the Rambam, when it comes to a man, he needs kavod. A man craves honor. A woman craves love. A man feels the honor by the way she respects him, by the way she executes on his will. That's the acts of service that Chapman talks about. And how does she feel it? She feels it in the need to be invested in. She feels it in receiving gifts as one of them. Of course, as we said, there's kesef, shtar, bia. It's not only that, but that becomes an important way of expressing that. And if that's the case between men and women, it's important to understand that with all of us, that we all have different ways of feeling respected and honored. We all have different ways of feeling disrespected. And you can't say, I don't understand why you're so insulted. I wouldn't mind if you did that to me. It's irrelevant what you would mind. What's important is that person. What is it that makes that person feel honored? What is it that makes that person feel dignified? And particularly bein ish leishto, to make sure that one's living the 5 love languages, or according to our Chazal here, we're talking about 2 primary ones. That in one case, there's physical investment of resources to make a woman feel adored and wonderful and valuable, and that she walks out in public, people can see she has a husband who invests in her. That's visible. She needs that visibility. And for a man, it's acts of service and acts of dedication that give him that sense of respect.